keynote speaker today is Mr. Pichai Chuensuksawadi, the editor-in-chief of the Post Publishing Company in Bangkok. Prior to hold this position, Mr. Pichai Chuensuksawadi was the editor of Bangkok Post and also held other positions at this newspaper, such as WAN-IFRA reporters. During the 1993 and 1994, he was the special assistant to the Secretary General of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the ASEAN, in Jakarta, Indonesia. He is also for many years a member of WAN-IFRA board and the chairman of the WAN-IFRA Southeast Asia Committee. He is also the chairman of the Bangkok Post Provident Fund and chairman of the Bangkok Post Foundation and vice chairman of the Put Hong Leper Foundation. I would like to now invite Mr. Pichai Chuensuksawadi to give the keynote address on the topic into the future coexistence of print with other media platforms. Please welcome Mr. Chuensuksawadi.
Mr. P.G. Pawa, the chairman of the Sakao Media Group, Mr. President, members of WAN-IFRA, distinguished participants. Good morning, and let me just say that it's really an honor and a privilege to be invited to speak to you, to share experiences at the 20th annual conference of WAN-IFRA India. We're here to talk about the future. This was an issue which we discussed. In Kiev at the World Newspaper Congress just recently. And in Kiev, like in many years in the past, there was always this comparison between what's happening in the West and the Asia Pacific. And in a nutshell, while newspapers are still very much alive around the world, circulation is going down. We all know this in the West. In the Asia Pacific, it's booming, still growing. But I'd like to just spend a little bit about that and just recap how far ahead is it going to go, because Jacob mentioned just briefly just now a number of very key and important issues which we all have to face or have faced, and in which I think despite the boom of the newspaper industry in India, you as industry leaders, I'm sure, will be facing in the future. Thank you. I'll click here. The Asia Pacific continues to grow, and I think the prospects will be enhanced furthermore in the next 3-5 years. There's the ASEAN Economic Community that will be formed. It will enhance integration. But there's one other development that's going to happen in November, which will take it even further. Apart from the 10 ASEAN countries, ASEAN now has free trade agreements with India, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Those 6 partners in November will begin to start discussing an even broader economic cooperation agreement between the ASEAN and the 6 FTA partners. What does this mean? This means that in the next few years after this year, and China may be able to start trading in this group. And we know that India and China don't have an economic cooperation. So it brings it even bigger. The prospects of further economic cooperation and growth in this region will grow. And the trend that will benefit all of us, but it won't benefit all of us equally. Our markets in this region are split up. There are more advanced markets, let's say, for instance, Australia, Japan, South Korea. Thailand is more moderate, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and there are new developing markets in Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. However, the best performers we know, India, China, and I would say Indonesia. So we all know that, but this is how we're going to be affected. So with what's happening in the general landscape, looking ahead, we will all benefit. But at the same time, we realize that the global economy will affect our business. This is what we do, and that's what affects us. It's happened before. It's happened in 2009. The euro crisis bothers us, and what it forces us to do is exactly what Jacob mentioned. It forces us to look at our businesses and what we do. It's inevitable. And we don't know what will happen in the future, whether there's another tsunami. God forbid it doesn't happen, but that will affect us. It affects our countries, our economies, and therefore it affects what we do. At the same time, we're dealing with a generational shift, which is at different stages, as we know, in our region. We have, the Asia Pacific is the largest with internet access. China is the largest in broadband. Japan and South Korea have really the largest mobile access markets. China and India, penetration is low, but it is growing rapidly, we know that. And the global mobile internet subscriptions has risen 40%, and at the same time, while broadband access in India is low, your mobile subscription penetration is staggering. It's 900 million, and yes, it's not all smartphones, but looking down the head, eventually it will get cheaper, more people will have access, and what does it mean? Jacob mentioned this, and it's food for thought, and maybe we'll go into that a little bit more. So this is basically where we are, quickly to recap. The question is, what does it mean? We're all newspaper companies, so how do we adapt? What do we do? What's the right way to go forward? And we all know that it really depends on the environment we operate. The environment in India, Malaysia, Singapore is all completely different. But I believe one thing, that even now, despite all predictions that, with the social media, with the digital media that's coming, the papers are going to die, they're going to fade away. I don't believe that. And I still believe, however, that even though this is coming and it will take an effect, we can coexist. Not only coexist, I would advocate embrace, if the conditions are right, if the opportunity arises, other media platforms. And I'm not just talking about the new media. I think newspapers need to prepare. And in order to do this, we need to prepare for, let me say, a long, arduous, and difficult journey of change, reporting to, first of all, its needs of its readers, but equally important, organizational change, which, in my view, is probably more difficult than dealing with your readers. Magdum has asked me to tell a story, and he said, why don't you tell us about what the Post has done? And this isn't about the Post, it's just about a journey of change. Have a look on the left there, and you'll see the products of the Post in 2001. One newspaper, 3 magazines, a student magazine, commercial printing, books, digital media, web only, very rudimentary. On the right-hand column, the ones in red in the last 10 years are the new things we have done. 2 newspapers, 3 magazines. But what's interesting is the television programming, the radio programming, and just ahead of that, the digital media. It's not rudimentary anymore, it's greatly improved. There's what Jacob had mentioned, video, Twitter, Facebook, connectivity, e-paper, apps, mobile apps, iPads. We're doing that, we've done it. In 10 years, this is what we've changed. But it's not about the Post, it's about the journey, and this is what I just maybe like to share with you, because there may be some elements which may be interesting to you. But before I go into that, this is our estimates of the total daily market in Thailand. 76% is mass. The English has got about 16. Then there's the business, which is about 5%. And just recently, the free paper is only 3%. So this is a broad brush of the newspaper market. The share, advertising share, clearly, with the others, the English and Post Today and others, it's only a small percentage. This is the English share, okay, there's only 2 English language papers, the Post and the Nation. This is the business daily share. On the right is the Post, the left are our competitors, so we roughly got half there. This is the magazine market. As you can see, this is the various groups, and we're number 2 in that. And the total media market, however, despite all of this, and the purple is where television dominates. 60 or 59 or 60% of advertising revenue is in TV. Only about 15%, 14% in newspapers. The rest is all cut up. I go back to my original slide. In 2001, we were a single newspaper company with 3 magazines. And in 10 years, we've made some changes. And when did that start? You may recall, some of you, the 1997 financial crisis. In a nutshell, in 3 years from 97, in Thailand, we suffered, we were bloody, we were battered, we shed 400 to 500 staff, and it made us think. We survived it like other newspaper groups. Some just never came back. Where are we going to go from here? Things were changing, internet was booming, digital media, there was television, this was the market we had. Where are we going to go? We survived everything, but what happened next? The board and the management sat together, we went to the beach, sat down for a weekend, we did some work and prepared. There were a number of things we decided then. 1, newspapers will and continue to remain the heart and soul of what we do and our company. 2, we had to be able to explain the story, provide our content to other platforms, not knowing then exactly how it was going to be, but because we had the content, because that's what we do, we thought that this is what we should do moving ahead. Those were the only 2 things in 97.
We did try Thai language papers in the 1990s. It was a political paper, but it failed in Thai language. But in 97, we thought, well, this is where we had to go. In 2002, we launched a Thai Business Daily. But as you just saw, there are already some competitors in the market. It's not just a question of producing another business daily, because in our internal discussions, we came to the conclusions, and I told my editorial staff, we're not deciding what's going in this paper. We're going to find out what the readers want. We're going to find out where the money is. But more importantly, we're going to start this paper, and it's an advantage to start from scratch with a new organization and a new mindset, something we didn't have with the Bangkok Post. I go back to my original point, organizational change. And it was an opportunity for us to start. I'll tell you how. Just one quick point. I said to the editor at the time, we're doing it differently. We do not want to have just taking staff from other newspapers. Half the staff must have no newspaper experience at all. We train them to write in a different way. Thai newspapers have a lot of jumps. Post Today, no jumps. Ironclad rule. We write it tight, we write it short, we explain it in greater depth inside, we tell the story better, but we make the organizational change. I'll go very quickly and I'll explain the story later, and as we launched Post Today, we launched other products as well. But then there was another key development which we call This occurred between 2006 and 2008. I'll explain in greater detail later, but it was after 1997 another re-look, another stock-taking of what we had achieved from 1997 to 2006 and where we wanted to go in the next 4 or 5 years. And very briefly, after the Garbee track, we started
News programming on satellite television, which, by the way, we failed. It didn't work out.
We can talk about that later. We revamped our digital team. We used to have an editor, a former editor, be in charge of the websites. Doesn't work. We got someone from the industry outside, from a portal, Thai portal, to revamp our digital operations. In 2010, we started co-producing 8 hours of news in Thai with the government channel, following on from our failure, I'll say failure, in 2008. Last year, we launched our 3rd paper, and that's another story I'll tell you in a minute. And next year, we have to launch our own television channel. All the black ones from 2008 to 2013 came from the Garbee tracks in 2006 to 2008. So I just mentioned earlier, 2000, we finally realized where we wanted to go. 2002, we launched a paper. 2006, it's time to take stock and find out where we are. What have we done? What have we achieved? And where we're going to go next. And it wasn't like in 2000 where it was the board and the management making a decision and then moving forward. We had to rethink. The media environment, the digital environment had changed and advanced so much. We needed to think of a new mission, a statement, and figure out what the strategic thrusts were going to be. Same conclusion again, though. The newspapers this time will remain heart and soul of the company and the core of our business. But at the same time, we need to go further in developing new markets, new audiences, domestic and international, through digital and electronic media. And then we looked internally. In Thailand, we have this, well, I would call it a problem. Like in many companies, when you're talking about issues, the first thing you say, people tend to say, the word there, "Panha mindset." Panha means problem. The problem is, many of us felt that we had to change that mindset. And rather than say, what's the problem, the question that comes up when we're discussing an issue is, what can we do about it? Easier said than done. So we came out, before we went in there, where did we want to do? We wanted to aim to be the best in our business of not just news, but also information, because information is what people want, and they've changed in that way in Thailand, the region, reaching out to the world. And we're not saying we're the best, because we're not the best. But the best here means we will continue to try to find ways of improving all the time. That's easier said than done, because, as you know, there's different levels. But if we keep that as a motto, we're always trying to do that, then we should be better. And then there's the discussion on who are we serving. Of course, we serve our readers, the advertisers, our customers, the shareholders, and this is a big debate. They all have equal billing, none more than others. Now, there was a big debate. Editorial says it must be the reader above everything else. But this is the conclusion we came to. So how do we move it forward? We can discuss about where we wanted to do. What we did was, we set up 7 groups. Improve newspaper operations, which is a difficult one, because you know what that meant? That meant cutting costs. Looking at what we do. Going back to Jacob's point, our operations, was it efficient enough? The price of newsprint was going up. Do we reduce the width? How many pages do we cut? How can we reduce costs? Freeze on staffing, things like that. This was the discussion in groups, including editorial and those from other departments.
from advertising to explain the situation so the editorial people can understand. There were several groups set up: efficiency, customer base, better performance-driven, instill that in the culture, find new revenue streams. I had to head that one. And let me tell you, this process lasted 3 years. And from here, infrastructure, technology, there was a big complaint in our company that the IT department was simply not responding to the needs of editorial, the needs of advertising, or the needs of classified and sales. Improve our own business operations, training and development of staff. These were the 7 groups we set up over the 3-year period between 2006 and 2008. On top of what we already had to do is run the business, make money, provide the news. Unlike 2000, there was a crucial difference this time around. The first meeting, yes, there were 30 managers, 30 department heads, plus their managers, to discuss this process, how we would proceed. Eventually, as time went on, within the first year, the number of people that participated in the various groups and in the annual meetings of the Kabir track numbered to 100. And members of middle management joined in. And I tell you what, it's really interesting, because middle management will tell you stuff that you don't know. Things that are happening, they come up with suggestions. At first they're very shy. Imagine what it's like. And managing and putting people in these groups was a challenge, because we wanted them to speak. We wanted them to come up with ideas. And then their former boss or a senior person is there and they won't speak. But this process went on for 3 years, and what we found that there were middle management people who shouldn't be there at all. In fact, some of them should be replacing their bosses. So when we talk of change with the readers outside, yes, absolutely, and we can come to that. But change in the organization, and I'm not just talking editorial, I'm talking about the complete company, to prepare yourselves for what's happening in the future is almost a must. Some of the projects in the 3 years were implemented. It's not on the list. For example, we used to have about 30 IT staff supporting the 2 newspapers at the time, advertising. We outsourced that completely. There are now only 5 staff left who monitor a contract which we did with an outsourced company, whose job it is to make sure that everything works for editorial, advertising, the whole company. We can measure that now. Before, when something went wrong in the editorial department, you can't get the paper out, the pages won't go out. What's happening with IT? Oh, a couple of more minutes and we'll be okay. And it drags on for more than a couple of minutes until now you don't know what's happening. We developed service level agreements, exactly when, what this IT outsourced company had to do. They were penalized if it's their fault that we can't get our pages out because it affects our business. And it took a long time, but we completely outsourced our IT support internally for all departments. Some of them ongoing, ERP, CRM system, customer-based. And as a result of that, the accounting department now, let me share with you, there will be a huge reduction in staff. We're pushing paper, signing all these documents, and, leave request. Everything had to be changed, computerized, changing the mindset, getting people to file applications online, finding information from the advertising, the basic information from advertisers where editorial can see, which sales can see. All this stuff is happening, and that's one of the ongoing internal projects that we're doing now. Soon to be completed this year, which unfortunately will result in about 40 to 50 staff in accounting going. Many projects, believe me, were not even considered. There was just so many, because when you have middle management proposing ideas, they don't have the full picture. But the fact is, we wanted them to come up with these ideas, and we didn't consider many of them, and quite a number of them, let me say, we tried and didn't work at all. One thing we did work is, as I mentioned, we revamped our digital media, set up a new operation, and this spurred us into television. We realize that even though we go through all this process of efficiency, internal restructuring, trying to make things work better, we then go back and say, well, where do we want to go? Yes, we have 2 newspapers, but we need to get in further. The biggest piece of the cake is there, and we wanted it. So we did more programming. Even though we failed in 2008, we lost money, it didn't work out, and we failed not because of trying. The Post Today staff, the new newspaper, actually got involved in the TV programming. Those who wanted to do that did. One of the ideas in the new revenue stream is to launch a newspaper, free paper for university students, a free entertainment paper. So from all those discussions between 2000 and 2006 came the idea of launching a free paper, a third paper. But the timing wasn't right. It's not that, we just can't think of it and just do it. It's the question of timing. What do you do first? What do you do second? Remember the first chart. 2001, Bangkok Post, the English paper, made up 71.23% of all the profits and revenues of the company. The magazines up there in red on the far left column in 2001 made up nearly, altogether, they nearly made up 85-90%. And as the world was changing, we had to change, otherwise we would be left behind. Digital was a very small number. 2011, the company has changed. Revenues from the main flagship is still the highest, but no longer dependent on just the English language. Post Today contributes nearly 16%. We started M2F, a free tabloid daily. 2 office workers in Bangkok who take the SkyTrain and the subway every day, 400,000 copies a day, Monday to Friday. Relying purely on advertising, and it started to make some revenue. But since we expanded, into other magazines, the proportion of magazine contribution or revenues is pretty much still the same 10 years later. But there are now more choices and more apples. What's interesting is TV and radio. The revenue that came in, even though we failed in 2008. Remember I mentioned we started co-producing news on a free channel 8 hours a day in 2010. It contributed revenues nearly 10% of the company total. So the basket has diversified, and we not just coexisted with another platform, we actually embraced it. We hired a staff of television people to do it, but we got some editorial people from the Thai paper to actually one person to be in charge and to rotate and to work in a TV environment, so that in the future, if we wanted to do our own channel, we weren't starting from zero. At the same time, by doing this, it provided us with a software base of staff if we wanted to make that transition. Our improvements in post-digital, meant an increase in revenue or contribution by 1.45%. On the right is year-to-date 2012. So, basically, it's heading in the right direction. So from 2001 to 2011, you can see the differences. You can debate what's good or what's bad, and I'm more than happy to answer questions later on, but this is the picture. But is that good enough? I think from a company which was considered English language, most established, just magazines, to what we have in 2011, we've done pretty well. A scorecard of 7 to 10, this is what we think we are. But as far as what we set out to do, we give ourselves a score of 5 to 10. 5 to 10. And in terms of financials, I couldn't find a thumb which goes like this even, because we also gave ourselves a 5 to 10. Now, people ask me, say, well, where are we going to go in the future? What Post is going to do? Fortunately, before about the middle of this year, we just had our strategic meeting where the CEO met 130 department heads and middle management. It's the annual strategic conference to explain and to discuss where we were going to go for the next 5 years. And there was a lot of silence when the figures were put up. Double the profits by 2000. Profits, not revenue. Profits by 2015. The two main newspapers, Bangkok Post and Post Today, are supposed to contribute 30% to the company's profits by 2015. M2F, 20%. We started in October. By July, in its first month, we made a profit. August, we made a profit. The free paper made a profit. Let me just digress a little bit. Why did we launch M2F, a free paper? In our market, in that environment, a lot of the younger generation, the generational shift, as I mentioned, were already getting their information on their smartphones. They weren't buying newspapers. But in our studies and the homework we did, there was one thing we discovered. They were busy traveling in the morning, but in the morning, there's a 45-minute gap of opportunity where they want to update themselves with the information and news, either on their PC or their mobile phone. But if we give it to them in an accessible way, in topics and issues which they discuss, they like, they will read. And advertisers will pay to reach those eyeballs. That's why we're confident by next year, M2F will be profitable. And therefore, the CEO has said M2F in 3 years' time, down the road from now, should contribute 20%. We're now under pressure from members of my board to say, why not raise it to 600,000 copies a day? We're resisting that simply because the advertising revenue, it's now 50-50. 45 advertising, 50 every day. And if this continues to pick up, then we will go to 600,000, but we're not too sure because, as you all know, it's all a question of cost. 20% from magazines, 20% from television. I just mentioned earlier, by next year, we're supposed to launch our own television station on cable and satellite. This is a big challenge. Interestingly, we only expect 10% of profits to be contributed from the digital. To me, it doesn't surprise, because if you listen to Thomas later on with the press trends, although circulation in certain countries are dropping and the environment is different, we don't rely on circulation so much. In our market, we rely on the advertising. And the digital, no matter how much effort you do, and we must embrace it, we have embraced it, as I mentioned earlier. We have the SMSs, the smartphone apps, we have the iPad, we have the e-paper. It's still, the revenue is just not coming in. But it doesn't mean we're going to abandon it. We will embrace it. But what my point is, we have also embraced, over the last 10 years, other existing platforms. And in order to do this, we came to the conclusion when we were thinking back, when we were talking about it in our strategic discussions last 2 weeks ago, that you had to have clear goals. Know what you want to do basically, but once you've started that, actually start working and really have clear goals. The resistance is something you would not believe. I'm sure many of you face that already. But once you start down a journey or down a path, I think, in which this is what you want to do, resistance will always be there, and you've got to have that commitment, not only among your managers, but those who you want to bring on board to resist that commitment and keep on moving forward. And it requires staff involvement. And I'm not just talking about your managers and department heads. I would advise middle management, because you will find gems there. You will find people who really should be moving up. And believe me, as a result of this whole process, let me say, The person who used to head our digital department took early retirement. When we moved to M2F, we had to produce 3 papers. The production director at the time said, "We can't print 200,000. We need to buy another tower." We're now printing 400,000, and that production director is no longer with the company. We have a new production director who's able to print 400,000, and his job now is to find out where we can print 600,000 without affecting the other 2 papers. You have to make those tough decisions, and those tough decisions may realize that the people who you've got supposedly doing certain things really shouldn't be there, because the next environment that's coming in, you need people who will be able to do it for you. It also requires, I think, the right people with the right mindset. These things link together. And what we found, let's say even now in the Bangkok Post, the journey, as you can see now, the journey is not one that's always been smooth. With integrated media discussions, newsroom discussions, in the Bangkok Post, which is the flagship, it's the oldest in the company, things change very, very slowly. We've identified the next level of leadership, whoever's going to be the editor at the end of next year and forward. They've been charged with coming up with how to make the reporters more efficient, more multimedia savvy, and they tried something, and just 6 months ago, in a discussion with me, they concluded, Pichai, it didn't work. It stalled. We're rethinking it again. They're revisiting it again. They have to do it pretty soon, because the current editor retires at the end of next year. So even if it stalls, you need to get it going again. But one thing we all realize, that if we get it going again the second time around, and it fails again, it's going to be almost impossible to push those changes forward. So not everything works out, but at least you have people with the right mindset to keep it going forward. And I think, if I just may leave with you, in the process that we've gone through in the last 10 years, the realization that change never ends. And in this whole process, there have been times when many of us have felt it's really tiring, it's really difficult. We're only just getting this part down, and suddenly something else is coming. It just never ends. And I'm sharing this with you because as I look at India, and I look at China, in particular look at India, you've got a booming newspaper industry. Your penetration, okay, internet may be low, but you've got mobile, it's coming. But your ad revenues, I guess you can't continue to increase ad rates continuously. You're expanding here and there, and that increased your costs. How do you manage it? You're going to have to look inside eventually. And if you're thinking of engaging in social and digital media and the new platforms, our experience is you can't do that unless you change internally. And I'm not just talking about cutting costs here and there. It's finding new people. I mentioned earlier that we have to launch our own satellite cable television in by at least the first half of next year. I'm not a TV man. Many of my staff are not. For the last 3 years, we've been immersed on the presenting side, on the news side, telling the story, getting involved in the operation, assigning of cameramen and all that, but actually running a television station, the graphics, all these other things, we're going to look from outside. But open the opportunity from anybody within all the editorial departments to come in and join the party. We'll need a head of production, a head of graphics, a head of news, because TV is a completely different animal. It's telling the story, yes. It's explaining what it means, yes. It's telling people what's going to happen in the future, yes. But there's a lot of entertainment, the images and all those things. And that needs needs a certain skill. And that's the challenge. But at the same time, for us, what we want to do is harness yet again from the 9 editorial teams that we have, how can you contribute to the program? We want your ideas. We want your involvement. We don't exactly expect you to actually produce the program. Surprisingly enough, some people want to actually produce it. And that means reorganizing inside and getting the workflow right. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave you with that thought that although the environment is changing and changing rapidly, will continue to change, as traditional newspapers, as we move and evolve as well, we can not only coexist with the other media platforms, I would suggest we need to embrace it as well. I don't know what's going to happen in India. You know the future better than I do. But when you move in this direction, engaging with the readers, yes, that's a priority. With the viewers, yes, that's a priority. And our journalists can train with that, but that's not enough. That organizational change, I'll go back to that point again, which Jacob mentioned again, needs to happen if you're going to coexist and embrace with other media platforms. And believe me, by doing so, and if we can do it, and it's an ongoing process, and you will make mistakes, you will fumble, still remember, our main objective, and this is what we all do, we aim to be the best that we can be as journalists, explaining what's happening, explaining what it means, and telling our viewers, readers, or listeners what will happen next. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pichai. Yes, please stay with us a few minutes more. Thank you for this very interesting presentation and for sharing with us not only your successes, but also the challenges that you met. And I think that's really important for everyone to understand where you come from, where you're going, and that was really interesting. So that it's not really traditional to have a question and answer session after the keynote. We usually have the debate later in the conference, but actually this presentation was so interesting, and also we actually have a few minutes ahead of schedule. So please, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any question for our speaker, there is already one question at the front row. Please say your name and company.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Rahul Chandavarkar. I'm the editor of the Sakal Times in Pune. Mr. Pichai, my question is, the free tabloid that you're giving for the commuters, the young commuters, or targeted at the young commuters, what impact has it made on the circulation of your bigger newspapers? Have you documented that? Do you have any findings?
Yes. There was a concern, especially with the Thailand business daily, that by coming up with a free paper of 400,000, it's not just targeting young. We're targeting, in Bangkok, we estimate there are 2 to 3 million office workers. And with the expansion of the SkyTrain, the number of people who use and commute using the SkyTrain and subway every day will increase from 700,000 to maybe 900,000, a big chunk. And it's not just young, any office worker. Up-to-date stories, because it prints later, so it's got the most up-to-date stories. It starts printing at 2 a.m., so from 11 to midnight it has a lead on all the other papers. But the advertising hasn't shifted, so what happened was we were getting advertising from consumer, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donut, Big C, super malls, and things like that, which the other two papers didn't have. That's a plus. The negative side, I guess, is we started getting complaints from the newsstand agents. Why are you giving this paper out? Because it was affecting their sales. Because once you give it free, 400,000 in the inner city, they're not buying the papers from the newsstands. So we had to tell the people whom we outsourced to give out the papers to give it away from the newsstands. But it did not affect the two other papers, especially the Thai paper. In fact, it's targeted in a certain way where its content is different. And the reason I think why it's been able to work, because all we did was increase the whole editorial staff of this paper by 40. Copy editors, reporters, 25, 30, and about 10 new sales. And the key was they have access to everything under the sun of the 2 other newspapers, and they do a rewrite. And they put it up on top of the latest news and information. So the actual manpower costs are low. The biggest costs is the cost of the paper and the cost of logistics. I hope that answers your question.
Is there another question? Yes, also on the front row.
I am Kulbeer Chikara, representing Haribhumi Group of Publications. Congratulations, Mr. Pichai, for this excellent kind of incisive presentation. You have given us a point that the print media can well coexist with other varieties of media. Specifically, you mentioned about one thing, but that it requires tremendous internal change. So, could you, for the benefit of the audience, explain it a bit more so that specifically, we get to know what actually you mentioned, that it requires, say, firing someone with a kind of different problem mindset, as you said. So, but when print versus rest of the media, new media, so what exactly, specifically on, practically speaking, what all changes do you suggest, or what your experience bears out, so that we can think on those lines, factors or the aspects of internal change, I want to ask.
Can I just mention editorial first?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm an editorial guy, so one of the things we wanted to do to prepare, let's say, the Bangkok Post, and as I mentioned, Bangkok Post and Post Today, they're two different animals. In both editorial teams, there is what we call the digital team in the editorial department. Bangkok Post has one, Post Today has one. But you know what? They operate differently. Some board members say, oh, you can have a combined big editorial team, you can produce all this stuff. I basically argued against it, because we're targeting different markets, different viewers, different readers. There has to be an original content and ideas. But in Bangkok Post, there's a digital team whose job is to, for example, produce online SMS news, breaking news, top stories on the web. Is it working? In my view, it's not working very well. Why? Because the reporters are not sending in their stuff that they should. As I mentioned earlier, there's a problem. It's stalled. We're going to go back at it and re-look at it. And we're not going to go through the telegraph model of this integrated newsroom. We don't think that's for us. There's a different approach we're going to take, and I can share that with you later. But that's not working so well, because the reporters who are on the ground have still got the mindset, I get my story, I go for my cup of coffee, I can fit the story later on. Post Today is completely different. Then again, you have to understand that we started with a clean sheet 10 years ago. And we changed things organizationally right from the beginning. But the digital team there sits in the editorial department. But they don't even they don't take much stuff from the paper. It's not a repetition of the paper. They're doing original content. Different approach. One thing we did when we wanted our photographers to do videos. They take shoot stuff, and we take it step by step. For example, we took an opportunity, remember the red shirt protests that led to the big fight in 2010. We decided to start a micro-site of that event because we knew it was a big story. We knew people would be interested. We had to tell the story, videos, and this was back when we geared it all up. And before that, I got a multimedia journalist to train our photographers to take video, to edit it. Some of them couldn't do it. We faced problems like, for example, a Thai photographer can shoot photos, he can take video, but he can't write the script or the story in English because it's not his, he can't write it. So that organization, we had to change things and how we, get people to do it, get people to change from what they did before to write a little subtitles on videos and to edit it We had very few people, so we got this training. 100 staff joined. But I knew in my mind that you weren't going to get 100 multimedia journalists. Give me 5. Just 5 or 4. And that 4 or 5, because they want to do it, put them in a position where they can actually show their stuff. And they will act as catalysts for others to get interested in. For example, empower them to do it. Give them the equipment and the support, for example. But even then, I think we need to get for that's just one example, okay, of changing at an operational level. And you need the right chief, you need the right people to be able to do that, yet at the same time get the support for them to do that. That's one example. Finding people is never easy. Fortunately for us, we had that experience in 1997. We had to sack 400 people. And for a company which was, if you remember, was just one company, one paper, this was their second home. You had to treat them as people. In hindsight, we didn't do it very well. Nobody had experience in dealing with such a financial crisis which affected all companies. Some of you will remember that. And the problem there we did was that we had to sack 400 people, but the management was doing it by department, by department, by department. In other words, prolonging the pain, the uncertainty. People were just that whole year preoccupied. We've learned since then, if you're going to do it, fork out what you want to do and do it once. But treat people as people. Gave them packages, talk to them. Your department managers need to be trained on how to do this. And I assure you, many of ours had no clue what to do. How do you sit down with someone who was your superior or your boss, who taught you everything, and now you have to tell him his second home is no longer? Your department managers or your middle management has to do all the assessment and things, but maybe their skills of working with people needs to be bolstered up. You need to do this internally. That's some of it, when we talk about training and resources, that sort of training. You need to train people to how to deal with this, because before, hey, production, the paper gets out, we print okay, but dealing with people was a big, big issue and is a big issue in any change. I would say, from experience, from what we went through, almost 80% of the problems and issues. I hope that answers your questions. I mean, there's so many areas, but as I said, you have to make tough decisions. When someone says we need to go to 400,000 and the answer is no, we can only do 200,000 and we have to buy a new press, it's not going to work. For me, I basically said we're not going to buy a new. I disagree, because buying a new press answers questions from below. Hey, is that going to affect our bonus? Is that going to affect our salary increases? That's what will happen. It happens now anyhow. So those tough decisions, fortunately I didn't have to do that because it's not my department, but certainly everybody realized that certain things had to be done. And if you do that at the top, I'll give you another example. When we were launching Post Today, this Thai paper, we had 1 month trial run, right? Every day. First day, boom, section. In the end, they came out without a features section. And I met with the editor, and he says, yes, we know we're going to get rid of her tomorrow. If you can't, after 6 months, get our section out for the first day of trials, you do that, you tell everybody else, it's not just the staff, it's the guys at the top as well. Of course, it's not across all departments. In any newspaper company, there's ad, sales, marketing, there's all departments. Those are the things, at least in your area, you should try. I hope that answers your questions. Just some examples.
Thank you. I'm sure there are still many questions. Unfortunately, we have to pursue with our program. I would have just maybe one last question, Pichai, which is I understood that this really forward-thinking and successful strategy that you presented has been designed in this very nice beach area in the south of Thailand, in Krabi.
Yes.
And so that makes me think, would you recommend to media companies from India and from the rest of the world to actually go to Krabi to define their own strategy for the future?
Yes, thank you, Jules. Yeah, we went to the beach. The first time the CEO said, we're going to do this process. And I reminded him, he was a new COO, but a friend. He said, look, before 2000, other COOs have tried to do this before. And I said to him, are you serious? I'm asking not because of you, because I tell you what, I've seen other COOs start this process, get a lot of people involved and excited that they're going to, they can affect change, and suddenly stops. It was tried twice before 2000. I said, if you don't finish it, don't start it. Because I don't think, the staff are going to say, okay, here we go again. You guy, you thing, Fortunately, CEO is not here with us anymore. But fortunately, our current CEO was part of that team, and by the way, we're not done yet. Unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. But yes, I would go to the beach, take 2 or 3 days, talk to your owners, say this is what you want to do. Invite the owners as well. Invite your shareholders. We did. To explain to them what we're doing, and also get from their sense if they have the same dream, it helps you a lot to move and head towards that dream. And if I just may talk about Bangkok just briefly. Next year, I go back to Jacob, who asked if we could do this. The World Newspaper Congress will be held in Bangkok next year. There won't be a regional conference of the Asia Pacific, but I would like to take this opportunity from all the supporters in Bangkok and all members of the Asia Pacific Committee to invite you all to Bangkok, and I hope there'll be a lot of editors and practitioners coming from the West, and I hope from the Asia Pacific and from India, you'll join us in Bangkok. So it'll be an East meet West in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pichai. And please stay with us just a couple of minutes more. I would like to call on stage Mr. Mohamed Makhdoom to present a token of appreciation from WAN-IFRA. Thank you, Pichai. And Makhdoom, would you please come on stage now and give your votes of thanks. Thank you.